The ash was cold. That was the thing Clara would remember for the rest of her life. Not the shame of it, not the laughter, the cold. They had let the fire die down on purpose, so the ash would be gray and damp, and they smeared it across her cheeks with their bare hands as if she were a wall that needed painting. "Hold still," her aunt said. "You'll only make it worse." Clara held still. She had learned long ago that fighting the Creole women only earned her more. Her cousin Prudence stood by the window in a gown the color of ripe plums, watching with a small, satisfied smile. "Not too much on the nose," Prudence said. "We don't want her to look like she's been down a chimney. We want her to look forgettable." Forgettable, that was the whole point. Clara did not understand it then. She was 19 years old, and for as long as she could remember, the Creole family had wanted her exactly one way, invisible. When guests came, she was sent to the scullery. When the vicar visited, she was locked in the pantry with the flour and the mice. And now, on the one morning she was finally being allowed out of the house, they were rubbing cold ash into her skin so that no one would look at her twice. "Why?" Clara asked. The word slipped out before she could stop it. "Why does it matter what I look like? I'm only a servant to you. You've said so 100 times." The room went very still. Her aunt's hand froze against her cheek. Prudence turned from the window, and for one strange moment, Clara saw something cross her aunt's face that she had never seen there before. Fear. It was gone in a blink. Her aunt wiped her hands on her apron and said in a hard, flat voice, "You look what you are, nothing. Now get in the cart." The cart smelled of turnips and old rope. Clara sat in the back of it, wrapped in a gray shawl full of holes, as the horse pulled them down the long road toward the great house on the hill. She had heard the servants whisper about that house for years. Thornhill, the seat of the young Duke, the one who had come home from the war 2 winters past and had not smiled since. They said he was hard. They said he was cold. They said that when his father died, the young Duke had shut himself away for a full year and spoken to no one. Clara did not care what he was. She only knew that the Creoles had been invited to bring servants to Thornhill for the great autumn gathering. Every noble family in the county was sending help, for the Duke was hosting more guests than the house could hold. And she, being the lowest of the low, had been dressed in rags and streaked with ash and sent along like a piece of furniture. She pressed her hand flat against her chest as the cart rattled on. There, beneath the torn shawl, hung the one thing that was truly hers, a ring. It hung on a bit of string around her neck, hidden always, worn always. It was heavy and old, and on its face was carved a small shape she did not understand, a bird with its wings spread wide, holding a single star. It was the only thing she had from before. Before the Creoles, before the ash, before the cold pantry and the locked doors. She could not remember the face of the man who had given it to her, not truly. But sometimes in the space between sleeping and waking she heard a voice, a deep, warm voice singing softly, and a word. "My little sparrow." She did not know whose voice it was. She only knew that when she heard it, she felt safe. And she had not felt safe in a very, very long time. The great house rose up before them like something out of a dream. Clara had never seen anything so large. Thornhill had more windows than she could count, and its gray stone walls climbed so high they seemed to hold up the sky itself. Carriages lined the drive, beautiful, gleaming carriages, with crests painted on their doors and footmen in fine livery. The servants were sent around the back, of course. Clara climbed down from the cart on stiff legs and was herded with the others into a long line in the courtyard. A stern-faced woman, the housekeeper, walked down the row, inspecting each of them, assigning them their tasks for the days ahead. "You," the housekeeper said to a strong-looking boy, "stables. You kitchens. You laundry." She came to Clara, she looked at the ash. She looked at the holes in the shawl. Her mouth thinned and she opened it to speak. And that was the moment the doors of the great house opened, and the Duke came out. Clara knew it was him at once, though no one told her. He was tall and dark, dressed all in black, and he moved through the courtyard the way a shadow moves across a field, quiet, certain, impossible to stop. Two men followed at his heels, talking quickly, holding papers. He did not seem to be listening to them. He looked tired. He looked, Clara thought, like a man carrying something very heavy that no one else could see. He was not meant to come this way. She understood that from the way the housekeeper stiffened, from the way the whole line of servants seemed to hold its breath. The Duke of Thornhill did not walk among the scullery maids, and yet here he was. He was going to pass right by her. Clara did the only thing she knew how to do. She lowered her head, and she made herself small, and she prayed to be exactly what her aunt had made her that morning. Forgettable. He was almost past her. She could hear his boots on the stone, one step, two. And then they stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Clara kept her eyes on the ground. She could see the toes of his black boots, turned now toward her. She could feel him looking. The whole courtyard had gone silent, the housekeeper, the servants, the two men with their papers, all of them frozen, all of them staring. "Look up," the Duke said. His voice was low, not cruel, but it was not a request either. Slowly Clara raised her head, and she watched his face change. She would never be able to explain afterward exactly what she saw. It was not the look a man gives a pretty girl. It was something else, something deeper and stranger, something that made the breath catch in his chest. He stared at her as if he were seeing a ghost, as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. His jaw tightened. His hand at his side closed slowly into a fist. And then he did a thing that no one in that courtyard would ever forget. The Duke of Thornhill, cold, hard, untouchable, reached out with his own hand and gently wiped the ash from her cheek. His thumb moved slowly across her skin, once, careful, as if he were uncovering something, as if beneath the gray and the grime he was searching for a face he already knew. Somewhere in the line, a servant gasped. Clara did not move. She could not. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. She looked up into the Duke's dark eyes, and she saw that his hand was trembling. This powerful man, this man who ruled half the county, was trembling as he touched her face. "What is your name?" he said. It was barely more than a whisper. Behind her, sharp and quick, came her aunt's voice, too loud, too frightened. "She's nobody, Your Grace. A simple girl, weak in the head. She scarcely knows her own." "I did not ask you," the Duke said. He did not raise his voice. He did not even look at the aunt. But something in his tone cut through the courtyard like a blade, and Clara's aunt fell silent at once, her mouth still open, the color draining from her face. The Duke looked only at Clara. "What is your name?" he asked again, and then, softer still, in a voice that seemed to cost him something to speak, "Who are you?" Clara opened her mouth. Her whole life she had been told she was nobody, nothing, forgettable, and now the most powerful man she had ever seen was looking at her as though she were the only person in the world, as though her answer might break his heart or mend it. He did not yet know which. She did not understand any of it. But she understood one thing in that moment with a certainty that frightened her. Her aunt had not covered her face in ash to make her ugly. Her aunt had covered her face in ash so that this man would never see it. And now he had. "Clara," she said, "my name is Clara." The Duke went very still, and across the courtyard where she stood clutching her plum-colored skirts, Prudence Crail began, very slowly, to shake. The Duke did not speak again. He stood there in the courtyard, staring at the girl called Clara, and the whole world seemed to wait with him. Then, without a word, he turned to the housekeeper. "Have this girl washed," he said. "Give her a clean dress, and bring her to the library within the hour." The housekeeper blinked. "Your Grace, she is only a—" "Within the hour," the Duke said. And he walked away. Clara stood frozen in the courtyard, the cold spot on her cheek still tingling where his thumb had passed. Around her, the other servants had begun to whisper. She could feel their eyes. She could feel, most of all, the eyes of her aunt, and when at last she turned to look, she saw a face she did not recognize. Her aunt was not angry. Her aunt was afraid, truly afraid, in a way Clara had never seen in all her years under that roof. "What did you say to him?" her aunt hissed, seizing her arm. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing," Clara said. "I told him my name, that's all." Her aunt's fingers dug in hard. "You listen to me, girl. You go up there and you keep your mouth shut. You know nothing. You remember nothing. Do you hear me? Whatever he asks you, you know nothing." And there it was again, that fear. Clara looked at her aunt's white face, and for the first time in 19 years, she felt something bloom in her chest that she had never dared feel before. Power. She did not understand it, but she understood that she had it now, that somehow, simply by being seen, she had frightened the woman who had spent a lifetime frightening her, and she was not going to give that up. "Yes, Aunt," she said quietly. But she was already thinking, "I will tell him everything I know." The trouble was, she knew so very little. They scrubbed her in a small room off the kitchen, in water that was barely warm, and they dressed her in a plain gray servant's gown that was too long in the sleeves. But it was clean, and when a maid held up a bit of looking-glass so that Clara might tidy her hair, she stopped, and she stared. She had not seen her own face clearly in years. The Crails kept no mirrors where she could reach them. The girl in the glass was a stranger, pale, yes, and thin, too thin. But there was something in the face that made the maid holding the glass go quiet. Dark hair, a high, clear brow, and eyes of an unusual gray-green, wide-set and steady, the kind of eyes that did not belong to a scullery maid at all. "You've a fine face under all that ash," the maid said softly. "Funny they'd hide it." Funny indeed, Clara thought. She reached up without meaning to and touched the ring where it hung hidden beneath her collar, the bird with its wings spread, the single star. Then a footman came to fetch her, and she followed him through halls grander than anything she had ever imagined, up a great curving staircase, past paintings of stern men in armor and beautiful women in silk, until at last they came to a tall door of dark carved wood. The footman knocked. "Come," said the voice from within. And Clara stepped into the library of the Duke of Thornhill. It was the largest room she had ever seen. Books rose from floor to ceiling on every wall, more books than she had known existed in all the world. A fire burned low in a great stone hearth, and by the window, his back to her, framed against the gray autumn light, stood the Duke. "Leave us," he said to the footman. The door closed. They were alone. For a long moment the Duke did not turn. Clara stood just inside the door, her hands folded, her heart hammering, and she waited. She had learned to wait. "Do you know," the Duke said at last, still facing the window, "that I have been looking for someone for 2 years?" Clara said nothing. "2 years," he went on, "since my father died. I have written letters, I have paid men to search. I have followed 100 false trails to 100 wrong doors." He paused. "And I had begun to believe that I was searching for a ghost, that the person I sought was dead, as everyone told me she was." He turned around then, and Clara saw that in his hand he held something small, a little oval case of gold, no bigger than an egg, worn smooth as if from much handling. He crossed the room toward her slowly. He stopped an arm's length away, and he opened the case, and he held it up so that she could see what was inside. It was a portrait, a tiny painting done in fine, careful strokes. A woman, young, dark-haired, with a high, clear brow and wide-set eyes of gray-green. Clara's breath stopped in her throat. It was her own face. Not quite. The woman in the portrait was older, perhaps 25, and there was a softness to her, a happiness that Clara had never worn. But the bones were the same. The eyes were the same. Anyone who looked from the little painting to the girl standing in that library would have known it at a single glance. "When you looked up at me in the courtyard," the Duke said quietly, "I thought my heart would stop. For a moment I believed I was seeing her, standing there, alive." He closed the case gently. "But she is not alive. She has been dead for 18 years, so you cannot be her." His dark eyes searched Clara's face. "Which means you can only be one other person in the world." "Who?" Clara's voice cracked. She tried again. "Who is she, the woman in the painting?" The Duke looked at her for a long, long moment. "Her name was Margaret Merrick," he said. "She was the wife of a soldier, a captain, and the bravest man my father ever knew, and she died bringing a child into the world." He paused. "A daughter." The room seemed to tilt. Clara reached out and put her hand against the back of a chair to steady herself. "They told me the child died too," the Duke went on, his voice very low. "A fever, they said, before her 3rd year. My father grieved it to the end of his days. It was the one thing he could never forgive himself, that he had failed to keep them safe." He took a step closer. "But you are not dead, are you? You have simply been hidden. For 18 years, someone has kept you hidden in ash and in rags and behind locked doors." Clara could not breathe, could not think. The whole world had narrowed to the little gold case in his hand and the sound of his voice. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I'm nobody. I'm a servant. The Crayles took me in out of charity. They always said that my mother was a fallen woman, that I was fortunate they fed me at all." "The Crayles," the Duke said, and something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "Yes, I imagine the Crayles told you a great many things." He set the little case down on the table between them. "Tell me," he said, "the night before your aunt sent you here, the nights when you were a child before you can properly remember, is there anything at all that you have kept? Any small thing that is truly yours that they did not give you?" And Clara understood that the moment had come. Her aunt's voice was in her ears. "You know nothing. You remember nothing." And a lifetime of fear told her to obey. But she looked at the little gold portrait of the woman with her own face, and she looked at this dark, tired man who had searched 2 years for a ghost, and she made her choice. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she reached beneath her collar and drew out the string. She lifted it over her head, and she held out in her open palm the heavy old ring with its worn carving, the bird with its wings spread wide, holding a single star. The Duke went utterly still. He did not reach for it. He only stared, and the color drained slowly from his face, and when at last he spoke, his voice was so quiet she could barely hear it. "Where did you get that?" he said. "I've always had it," Clara whispered. "It's the only thing from before. I don't even know what it means. It's just a bird." "It is not a bird," the Duke's voice shook. "It is a lark, rising with a star at dawn." He raised his eyes to hers, and there was something in them now that frightened her more than any anger ever had. "It is the crest of Captain Edmund Merrick. It was buried with him on a battlefield in Spain, or so the world was told." He swallowed. "There were only ever 2 made. My father kept the other one until the day he died. It is in a box in this house, not 30 feet from where you are standing." The fire cracked in the hearth. Outside, a carriage rattled up the long drive. And Clara Merrick, who had been nobody, who had been nothing, who had been forgettable, stood in the library of the Duke of Thornhill and felt her entire life come apart around her like a dress cut open at the seams. "Then who?" she began. The door burst open. "Your Grace, forgive me." Her aunt swept into the room, breathless, her face fixed in a terrible smile. Behind her came Prudence, pale as milk. "I'm afraid the poor girl has quite imposed on your kindness. She is not well, Your Grace, she tells stories. She always has. The doctors said her mind was." Get out, the Duke said. Your Grace. Get out. He did not shout, but he crossed the room in 3 long strides, and he stood between Clara and the Creole women like a wall, and when he spoke again each word fell like a stone. You will remove yourself from my library. You will not touch her. You will not speak to her. And tomorrow, madam, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about a girl your family reported dead 18 years ago, and about the money you have been paid every quarter ever since to care for a child you told the world was in her grave. The smile fell from her aunt's face, and Clara, watching, saw the truth arrive in the woman's eyes, the truth she had carried like a knife for 18 years, finally catching up to her. They had been paid, all this time, paid to raise her, and they had kept the money and starved the child and rubbed ash on her face to hide her. You'll regret this, her aunt whispered, but it was not to the Duke she spoke. It was to Clara, and there was murder in her eyes. That night Clara did not sleep. She had been given a room, not a servant's cot in the cold attic, but a real room, with a real bed and a fire in the grate and a window that looked out over the dark gardens of Thornhill. A maid had brought her supper on a tray, hot soup, fresh bread, a slice of meat, more food than she was sometimes given in 3 days at the Creole house. Clara had eaten every crumb, half afraid it would be snatched away. Now she lay in the soft bed, wide awake, and stared at the ceiling. Merrick, her name was Merrick. Her mother had been beautiful and her father had been brave, and somewhere in this very house there was a second ring, the twin of the one that had hung against her heart all her life. It was too much. It was like a story told to a child, the kind of story that could not possibly be true, because true things did not happen to girls like her. And yet, she rose and she went to the window and she looked out at the dark. Somewhere below in that great house, the Duke was awake too. She was certain of it. She had seen his face when he looked at the ring. Whatever had happened 18 years ago, it had marked him as deeply as it had marked her. She wanted to know. She had spent 19 years not knowing who she was, not knowing why she was hated, not knowing what she had done to deserve the cold and the ash and the locked pantry doors. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would ask him everything. She did not know that by tomorrow, the Creoles would already be at work. The Duke was in his study when the knock came, near midnight. He had not slept either. He sat at his father's great desk. It would always be his father's desk, no matter how many years he sat behind it, with the little gold portrait open before him and a glass of untouched wine at his elbow. His man, Hargrove, entered quietly. Hargrove had served the family for 40 years. He had known the old Duke, and he had known the war, and there was very little in the world that could still surprise him. You sent for the papers, Your Grace. I did. Hargrove set a leather folder on the desk. It was thick with age, its edges soft, its ribbon faded. The Duke looked at it for a long moment before he untied it. You know what these are, he said. It was not quite a question. I know your father kept them under lock and key, Hargrove said, and I know that when he was dying he asked for them. He held them the night he passed. The old man hesitated. May I speak plainly, Your Grace? You always have. That girl below stairs, the one with the ash. Hargrove's lined face was grave. She has the Merrick eyes. I saw it the moment she came through the courtyard. I served in this house when the captain used to visit before the war. I would know those eyes anywhere. He paused. I had thought I would never see them again. The Duke opened the folder. Inside were letters. Old letters in 2 different hands, one strong and slanting, one careful and neat. And beneath the letters, a single document sealed in red wax that bore the old Duke's own crest. My father made a vow, the Duke said quietly. He was not really speaking to Hargrove. He was speaking to the fire and to the dead. Did you know that? On the field at Talavera, when the guns had stopped, Captain Merrick threw himself in front of a blade meant for my father. He took the wound that should have killed a duke, and he died of it 3 days later in a farmhouse outside the town. Hargrove bowed his head. I did not know the manner of it, no. My father held his hand at the end. The duke's voice was steady, but only just, and Merrick made him swear. He had a wife in England and an infant daughter and no fortune to leave them, a soldier's pay and a soldier's name, nothing more. So he asked my father for the only thing a dying man can ask. He said, "Promise me you will keep them safe. Promise me my daughter will never want for anything. Promise me she will be raised as your own blood." The fire cracked. "And my father promised," the Duke said. "He swore it on his life." He touched the sealed document, the one in red wax, but he did not break it. He came home. He learned that Margaret Merrick had died in childbirth even as her husband lay dying in Spain, that the child had been born motherless and fatherless in the same season, and he set out to keep his oath. He arranged for money, a great sum, paid every quarter to the family who had taken the infant in distant cousins on the mother's side, the Crayles. Hargrove's head came up sharply. "He meant to bring the child here himself when she was old enough," the Duke went on, "to raise her at Thornhill as he had promised, but before the year was out the Crayles sent word." He picked up one of the letters, the careful, neat hand, and his knuckles whitened around it. The child had died, a fever, they wrote, buried in the village churchyard before he could even come to see the grave. They sent their deepest regrets. And they asked, very humbly, whether the quarterly payment might continue a little longer, to cover the costs of the burial and the physician, and their own great grief. Slowly the Duke set the letter down. "My father paid for the funeral of a child who was not dead," he said, and then he went on paying, every quarter for 18 years because he never truly believed she was gone because some part of him could not let go of the promise. He kept sending money to that house long after any burial was paid for. I found the accounts after he died. I did not understand them. A pension paid faithfully to a family of no importance for a child in a grave. He looked up at Hargrove and his eyes were burning. "So I went to find the grave. I wanted to lay flowers on it for my father's sake, to close the door on the one thing that had haunted him." And Hargrove said softly, "There is no grave," the Duke said. "There never was. I stood in that churchyard with the parish register in my hands, and there was no record of any Merrick child ever being buried there. No stone, no name, nothing." His hand closed into a fist on the desk. "That was 2 years ago. That is when I began to search, because if there was no grave, then somewhere in the world there was a living girl. My father's unkept promise, walking and breathing, unaware that she was owed everything." The room was silent but for the fire. "And now she is sleeping upstairs," Hargrove said, "in the east room." "Now she is sleeping upstairs," the Duke agreed. He rose, and he went to the window, and he looked out at the same dark gardens that Clara, 2 floors above, was also watching without knowing it. "I will keep my father's oath," he said. "Where he failed, I will not. That girl will have her name back. She will have her mother's portrait and her father's ring and every penny that was stolen from her. And the Crayles," his voice went very quiet and very cold, "the Crayles will answer for 18 years, in a court if I can manage it, but they will answer." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. "Your Grace," he said at last, "may I offer a word of caution?" "Speak." "A family that has committed fraud against a duke for 18 years is a family with a great deal to lose. Such people do not surrender quietly. When they understand that the truth is known, that the girl has been recognized, they will not simply confess and beg your mercy." The old man's face was troubled. "They will fight, and they will not fight fairly." The Duke did not turn from the window. "Let them," he said. But Hargrove, who had lived a long time and seen a great deal, was not comforted, because he knew something the Duke, in his anger, had not yet stopped to consider. The Crails had one weapon left, a single, terrible weapon that the Duke himself had just named without seeing it. There is no grave, he had said, no record, nothing. But records could be made, and a family that had lied for 18 years could lie once more, could produce, from some bribed and frightened clergyman's hand, a paper that said the true Merrick child had indeed died long ago, and that the gray-eyed girl upstairs was nothing but a servant, a pretender, a fraud dressed up to steal a dead heiress's fortune. Hargrove looked at his master's back, and he decided he would say nothing tonight. The Duke had suffered enough for one evening. But he resolved to sleep lightly, and to keep a close watch on the road from the Crail house. For he had a feeling, deep in his old bones, that the worst of this was not yet come. Meanwhile, 3 miles away, in a cold house with the fires banked low to save the coal, Clara's aunt sat at her writing desk with a candle and a sheet of paper, and a face like carved stone. Prudence stood behind her, wringing her hands. "Mother, if he takes her in, if he gives her the name, then she'll be an heiress, she'll be a lady, and will be." "Be quiet," her mother said, "and let me think." She dipped her pen. She stared at the blank page for a long moment. And then slowly she began to write a letter to a certain Reverend Coombe, a weak man, a man with debts, a man who had done the Crail family a discreet service once before, many years ago, and who could be relied upon to do another. "My dear Reverend," she wrote, "an old matter has arisen which requires your particular skill. There is a grave that must be filled on paper at least." The candle flickered. Outside, the wind rose, and the trap that would nearly destroy Clara Merrick began, quietly, to take its shape. For 3 days, Clara lived in a dream. She kept waiting to wake from it. Each morning she opened her eyes in the soft bed and lay very still, certain that any moment her aunt's voice would come screeching up the stairs, that the fine room and the warm fire and the whole impossible tale would dissolve like breath on cold glass. But it did not dissolve. The maid came with hot water. A dressmaker came, sent for by the Duke, and took her measurements with careful hands and did not once look at her as though she were dirt. And slowly, hour by hour, Clara began to let herself believe. She was not a servant here. No one called her girl. No one struck her, or locked her away, or sent her to the scullery. When she came down the great staircase, footmen bowed. It frightened her more than cruelty ever had, because she did not know the rules of it, and all her life the not knowing of rules had earned her pain. But the Duke was patient. He did not overwhelm her. He did not press her with questions or parade her before his guests. In fact, he had quietly sent most of the great autumn gathering away, pleaded illness, canceled the shooting, emptied the house of all the fine carriages until only a handful of trusted people remained. He had done it, she slowly understood, for her, so that she might find her feet without 100 curious strangers watching her do it. They took to walking in the gardens each afternoon. It began by accident. She had gone out alone the first day, drawn to the cold autumn air, and found him already there, standing at the end of the long yew walk with his hands behind his back. She had turned to go, but he had said, without turning, "Stay, if you would like to." And she had stayed. They did not speak much, those first walks. He seemed to understand that she had spent a lifetime being told to be silent, and that words did not come easily to her yet. So he simply walked beside her, and he named things. "That is a copper beech. My grandmother planted those roses. There is a heron that fishes in the lower pond if you are quiet enough to see him." And gradually, in the naming of small and gentle things, something in Clara began to unclench. "You needn't be afraid of me," he said on the 3rd afternoon. They had stopped by the lower pond. The heron was not there. The water was gray and still. "I'm not afraid of you," Clara said. And then, because she had promised herself she would never again say a thing she did not mean simply to be safe, she added, "I'm afraid of how easily this could be taken away." The Duke was quiet a moment. "Nothing will be taken from you," he said, "not while I live." "You say that," Clara looked at the still water, "but you don't know what they're like, the Krails. You think because you are a duke and they are nobody that they cannot touch you. But they have spent 18 years hiding one small girl in plain sight, right under the nose of the whole county, and no one ever knew. No one ever came, not even your father's men when they searched." She turned to look at him. "They are very good at what they do, your grace. Do not think them fools because they are cruel." The duke studied her face, and something moved behind his eyes, respect perhaps, or something warmer than respect. "You are not what I expected," he said quietly. "What did you expect?" "I don't know, a frightened child perhaps, a broken thing." He shook his head slowly. "Not this, not someone who watches and thinks and warns me of my own arrogance before I have even shown it." The corner of his mouth moved, the ghost of a smile, the first she had seen on him. "My father would have liked you. He had no patience for fools either." Clara felt her face grow warm, and she looked away, down at the water, because she did not know what to do with kindness. It was harder to bear than cruelty. Cruelty she had armor for. "Tell me about him," she said. "Your father, if it doesn't pain you." So he told her. As they walked back through the gardens in the fading light, he told her about the old duke, a hard man and a proud one, but a man who kept his word as though his soul depended on it. He told her about the oath, and about the guilt his father had carried to his grave, and about the 2 years he himself had spent searching a country full of wrong doors. And Clara listened, and for the first time in her life she understood that she had been loved before she was even born, that a dying soldier on a foreign field had thought of her with his last breath, that a proud old duke had spent 18 years grieving her. She had believed all her life that she was worth nothing to anyone, and it had been a lie. She had been worth a promise between men that could not be broken even by death. She had to stop walking. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. The duke stopped too. "Clara." "I'm sorry," she managed. "It's only no one ever wanted me my whole life. I thought they told me I was a burden, that I should be grateful they didn't put me in the workhouse." She wiped at her eyes, angry at the tears, angry that they came at all. And all this time there were people who. "Yes," the duke said gently, "there were." And he did not touch her, though she felt that he wished to. He simply stood near her in the cold blue dusk while she wept for the childhood she might have had, and he let her weep without hurry, without shame, until the storm had passed. It was, Clara thought afterward, the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her, to let her grieve and to ask nothing of her while she did. Something changed between them in the garden that evening. Neither of them spoke of it, but it was there when they walked back to the house, a warmth, a nearness, a thread drawn taut and humming between them. Clara went up to her room that night and lay awake, not from fear this time, but from something she had no name for, a lightness, a hope so large it frightened her. She should have known better than to hope. The letter came the next morning. Clara was at breakfast. She had only just learned to sit at the great table without flinching, when Hargrove came in with a silver tray, and on the tray a single folded paper, and on his old face a look that made the food turn to ash in her mouth. "Your Grace," Hargrove said quietly, "this has come. I thought you should see it at once," and his eyes flicked to Clara, "in private perhaps." The Duke took the letter. "Whatever concerns Miss Merrick may be said before her." Hargrove hesitated, then he bowed his head. The Duke broke the seal. He read, and Clara watched his face, and she saw it happen, saw the warmth of the last 3 days drain out of it, saw the jaw tighten and the eyes go hard, and something like dread creep in behind them. "What is it?" she said. "What's happened?" The Duke did not answer at once. He read it a second time slowly, as though the words might rearrange themselves into something better. "It is from a clergyman," he said at last, "a Reverend Coombe, of the parish where the Krails have their house." He set the letter down very carefully. He writes to inform me, as a matter of Christian conscience, he says, that he has become aware of a grave fraud being perpetrated against my house, that a young woman of low birth, a servant in the Crail household, has been coached to impersonate the late Captain Merrick's daughter in order to lay false claim to the Merrick name and the fortune attached to it. The room went very cold. He writes, the Duke continued, his voice flat and terrible, that the true Merrick child did in fact die in infancy 18 years ago of a fever exactly as the Crails reported at the time, and that he can prove it. He paused. He encloses a copy of the burial record, entered in the parish register in his own hand, dated the correct year, signed, witnessed. He turned the letter over. Beneath it was a second sheet, older looking, the ink browned with age, bearing the careful lines of an official record. Clara stared at it, her stomach dropped away. "But that's not true," she whispered. "There is no grave, you said so yourself. You went and looked, there was no record." "There was no record," the Duke said grimly. 4 days ago there was no record." He looked up at her and she saw the trap closing in his eyes even as he spoke it aloud. "But records can be added. A page can be aged. A weak and frightened clergyman with debts to pay can be made to write a lie in his own church's book and swear to it before God and the law." His hand closed slowly into a fist upon the table. "They have manufactured your death, Clara, and now on paper there are 2 of you. The true daughter, safely buried these 18 years, and the lying servant girl, the pretender, who has wormed her way into a grieving Duke's house to rob him." Clara could not speak. She looked at the browned and official page, at the neat clerical hand that had written her out of existence, and she felt the old cold closing over her again, the ash, the locked door, the certainty that she was nothing and would always be nothing. "They've thought of everything," she said faintly, "haven't they?" And then a worse thought came, slowly, terribly. She raised her eyes to the Duke's face, to this man who had wept worthy kindness in his gardens not a day ago, this man who had sworn nothing would be taken from her. "You believe them," she said. It was not a question. Her voice had gone very small and very flat. "You're looking at that paper and some part of you're wondering whether I'm what they say, whether I found the ring somewhere or was given it and coached and sent here to fool you." Her throat closed. "Aren't you?" The Duke did not answer. He did not answer. And in that silence, that single, terrible, unbearable moment of silence, where a no should have come and did not, Clara felt her heart break clean in 2. She rose from the table. Her legs did not quite hold her, but she made them. "Thank you for the 3 days," she said. "They were the kindest of my life. I'll not trouble your house any longer." Clara, the Duke was on his feet. "Sit down. That is not, I did not say." "You didn't need to say it," she said. And she walked out of the breakfast room, past a stricken Hargrove, past the bowing footman, up the great staircase she had only just learned not to fear, while behind her the Duke of Thornhill stood frozen at the head of his table, the forged record of her death in his hand, and the truth of his own doubt written plain across his face. Clara did not have a plan. She knew only that she could not stay in a house where the man who had promised to protect her had looked at a forged paper, and for the space of one breath, wondered if she were a liar. So she gathered the few things that were truly hers, the ring, the string, the plain gray dress she had arrived in, which she had kept folded in a drawer like a warning, and she left the fine gowns hanging in the wardrobe, and she walked down the servants' stair so that no one would stop her. She went out through the kitchen door, into the gray morning, the same way she had come. The great drive stretched before her, long and empty. 3 miles to the Crail house, though God knew she would not go there. Beyond that she did not know. A town somewhere, work somewhere. She had scrubbed floors all her life. She could scrub them for wages instead of for cruelty. It was not much of a future, but it would be hers, and no one could forge a paper to take it away. She had reached the great iron gates at the end of the drive when she saw the woman. She was old, very old, past 70, bent under a black shawl, leaning on a stick. She stood just outside the gates as though she had been waiting there a long while, and when she saw Clara coming down the drive she went very still, and her hand came up to her mouth. "Oh," the old woman breathed, "oh, in the name of God." Clara slowed. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" The old woman did not answer. She was staring at Clara's face the way the Duke had stared, the way the maid with the looking-glass had stared, as though she were seeing a ghost walk out of the past. Her eyes filled. Her old lips trembled. "You have her face," the woman whispered. "Margaret's face. I would know it in the dark. I would know it at the end of the world." She took a shaking step forward, gripping the iron bars of the gate. "Child, child, tell me your name. Tell me the name they gave you." Something in Clara's chest went tight and strange. "Clara," she said. "My name is Clara." The old woman made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. "Clara," she said. "Yes, yes, of course, after her grandmother. She always said if she had a daughter she'd be Clara." The tears ran freely down her lined face now. "They told me you were dead. 18 years ago they told me the fever took you and they turned me from that house and would not even let me see the grave. But I never believed it. In here," she pressed a knotted hand to her heart, "in here, I never once believed it." "Who are you?" Clara whispered. But she thought, even as she asked, that she already knew, that some part of her, older than memory, had known the moment she saw the old woman's face. "My name is Martha Dunn," the woman said. "I was your mother's nurse when she was a girl, and I was yours for the first 2 years of your life until they sent me away. I held you the day you were born, child. I held you the night your mother died when you had no one else in all the world." Her voice broke. "I have been looking for you for 18 years." And Clara, who had walked out of the great house believing herself unwanted, believing the world had lied, and she was nothing after all, stood at the iron gates of Thornhill, and found that she was not alone. She reached through the bars, and the old woman caught her hands, and the two of them held on to one another and wept. It was Hargrove who found them. The Duke had raised the whole house the moment he realized Clara had gone. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He had been standing at the window of his study cursing his own cowardice when a stable boy came running with word that the young lady had been seen walking down the drive. Hargrove had gone out at once, and now he came upon the strangest of sights, the lost Merrick daughter and a weeping old woman in a black shawl, clinging to each other through the bars of the gate. "Miss Merrick," Hargrove said carefully, and both women turned. Clara's face hardened. "I am leaving, Mr. Hargrove. You may tell your master he needn't trouble himself." "I will tell him no such thing," Hargrove said, "because I do not lie to save myself trouble, and it would be a lie to say he is not already troubled beyond measure." The old man's shrewd eyes moved to Martha. "And who is this?" "Martha Dunn," said Clara. "My mother's nurse, and mine. She has been searching for me for 18 years while I sat 3 miles away in ash and rags and no one came." Her voice shook with something that was not quite anger and not quite grief. "So you see, Mr. Hargrove, the world is full of people who searched for me, and not one of them found me until it was too late to do me any good." Hargrove was quiet for a moment. He was an old man and a wise one, and he understood that the girl before him was not truly speaking of the world. She was speaking of the man who had doubted her over a scrap of forged paper, the one wound, out of all her wounds, that had cut the deepest, precisely because she had let herself trust the hand that dealt it. "Miss Merrick," he said gently, "will you permit an old servant to say a thing you will not wish to hear?" Clara said nothing, but she did not walk away. "My master is a proud man and a hard one, and he has been alone a long time," Hargrove said. "When he read that paper this morning, he did not doubt you because he believed it. He doubted you because he is afraid. He has wanted for 2 years one thing: to right his father's wrong, to keep the oath, to find the lost child and make her whole. And this morning a letter arrived telling him that the thing he wants is a trick, a fraud, a cruelty dressed up to make a fool of him. Hargrove spread his old hands. A weaker man would have seized the excuse and been glad of it. Sent you off, kept his fortune, told himself he'd done his duty. My master did not do that. He froze. For one breath, one single breath, the fear got its hand around his throat, and you saw it, and it broke your heart, and I do not blame you. He paused. But he did not act on it, Miss Merrick. He has spent the whole of this morning in torment because, for one instant, he failed you, and he knows it, and he cannot forgive himself for it any more than you can. Clara's eyes stung. She looked away down the empty road. It is a very small comfort, she said, to be doubted only for a moment. It is, Hargrove agreed, but I have lived 70 years, Miss Merrick, and I will tell you what I have learned. There is no such thing as a love that never falters. There is only the kind that falters and is ashamed and comes back stronger for the shame, and the kind that never had to falter because it was never truly tested. He looked at her steadily. The first kind is the only kind worth having, because it is the only kind that knows what it costs. Beside them, old Martha had been listening in silence. Now she spoke. "Child," she said softly, "you may go if you wish it. I will go with you wherever it is, and gladly. I have nothing left in this world but you, and I would follow you to the workhouse door before I lost you again." She reached into the folds of her black shawl. "But before you decide, there is something you must see. Something I have carried for 18 years, waiting for the day I might put it in your hands." And she drew out a small, worn bundle of cloth. She unwrapped it with trembling fingers. Inside was a locket, gold, oval, very old, and Clara's breath caught, because it was the twin of the little case the Duke carried, the very same size, the very same make. Martha pressed the catch, and it opened. Two portraits side by side, a man in a red coat, dark-eyed, laughing, and a woman with Clara's own face. "Your mother gave me this the week before you were born," Martha whispered. "She had it made, the two of them together, so that if anything should happen, the child would know her mother and father's faces. And she made me promise. She said, 'Martha, if I do not live, you must keep this safe, and you must give it to my daughter with your own hands, and you must tell her that she was wanted, that she was loved before she ever drew breath.'" The old woman was weeping again. "I have kept it 18 years, child. Through every door they shut in my face, and here it is, and here you are, and I have kept my promise." Clara took the locket in both hands. She looked at the laughing man in the red coat, her father, and at the woman with her own eyes, her mother, and she could not breathe for the weight of it. And Hargrove, watching, saw something on the back of the open locket that made his old heart quicken. Fine engraving, worn but clear, in a strong slanting hand. He had seen that hand before, that very morning, in the folder of old letters on the Duke's desk, the letters written by Captain Edmund Merrick. "Miss Merrick," he said very quietly, and there was something new in his voice. "That locket, may I look at the engraving upon the back?" Clara turned it over. And there, in her father's own hand, were words that no forger 3 miles away could ever have known to counterfeit, words that matched, letter for letter and stroke for stroke, the writing in the dead captain's letters locked in the Duke's own study. Hargrove straightened slowly. For the first time that terrible morning, the old man smiled. "Miss Merrick," he said, "I believe you had best come back to the house, not for his sake." He nodded at the locket in her hands. "For yours, because you have just walked out through that gate carrying, around your neck and in your hands, the two things in all the world that can break the Crails lie to pieces, and if you leave now, you leave your own weapons behind." Clara looked down at the locket, at the ring on its string, at her mother's face and her father's hand. And far off down the road, unseen as yet, a carriage was coming. The Crail carriage, black and fast, sent the moment they learned the girl had left the Duke's protection and stood alone and unguarded upon the open road. They meant to take her back. They meant to have her declared a madwoman, or worse, before the Duke could gather his proof, and they were very nearly close enough. Clara heard the horses before she saw them. She and Martha had just turned back toward the great gates, Hargrove walking ahead of them when the sound came rolling up the road, the fast, hard drumming of hooves driven without mercy. Clara turned, and her blood went to ice. She knew that carriage, black with the paint peeling at the corners, drawn by two lathered horses. She had ridden in it herself only days ago, sitting in the back with the turnips. It was the Crail carriage, and it was coming fast. "Get inside the gates," Hargrove said sharply. "Both of you now." But the gates were open and wide, and the drive was long, and the carriage was already upon them. It slewed to a halt in a spray of gravel, and before the wheels had stopped turning, the door was flung open and Clara's aunt came down from it, no longer in her fine visiting clothes, but plainly dressed, grim, purposeful, with two hard-faced men climbing down behind her. "There she is," the aunt said. "Take her." "You will do no such thing," Hargrove said, stepping between them. "This is the Duke of Thornhill's land, and this young woman is under his protection." "This young woman," the aunt said, "is a lunatic and a runaway, and I am her lawful guardian, and I am taking her home before she does herself or someone else a harm." She produced a paper from her cloak and thrust it forward. "I have a magistrate's order. She is disordered in her wits. She has fled her household, and I will thank an old servant not to stand between a Christian woman and her sworn duty." Clara's stomach turned over. She saw exactly what they had done. The forged burial record this morning, and now this, a claim of madness, a guardian's right. If they took her back to that house, if they locked her away and swore before a magistrate that she was mad and had always been mad, then anything she said afterward, "I am Clara Merrick, I am the captain's daughter," would be the raving of a lunatic. No one would believe her. They would not even have to kill her. They would simply have to make the world stop listening. "I won't go," Clara said. Her voice shook, but she said it. "I won't go back to that house. You can't make me." "Take her," the aunt said again, and the two men moved. Martha stepped in front of Clara, all 5 feet of her, brandishing her stick. "You'll not touch her. You'll not lay a hand on this child, not while I breathe." One of the men shoved the old woman aside. She went down hard on the gravel with a cry, and Clara screamed and lunged for her, and a hand closed around Clara's arm and wrenched her back. And for one horrible moment the whole world was noise and grasping hands, and the smell of the old black carriage that had carried her here in ashen rags. And she understood that they were going to win, that they had thought of everything, that the 3 days of warmth in the great house had been a dream after all, and this cold and these cruel hands was the truth of her life, and always had been. And then a single word cracked across the morning like a pistol shot. "Stop!" Everyone froze. The Duke of Thornhill was riding down the drive. He had not waited for a horse to be saddled properly. He was riding bareback, coatless, his dark hair wild, and he came down that long drive at a full gallop and hauled the horse to a rearing halt not 10 feet from the carriage. He came off its back before it had fully stopped, and Clara had thought she had seen him hard before, had thought the cold, tired man of the courtyard was as forbidding as a man could be, but she had never seen anything like the Duke of Thornhill in that moment. There was murder in him. It came off him like heat off a fire. The two hard-faced men let go of Clara and stepped back without being told. "Your Grace," the aunt began, "this is a private family matter, and I have a lawful order." The Duke crossed to the fallen Martha first. He knelt in the gravel, heedless of his fine breeches, and helped the old woman sit up, and asked her low and quiet if she was hurt. Only when she nodded that she was well did he rise, and only then did he turn to Clara's aunt. "A lawful order," he repeated softly. "To take my ward into my keeping. She is disordered." "Show me." The aunt held out the paper. The Duke took it. He read it once, his face perfectly still, and then without hurry he tore it in half, and in half again, and he let the pieces fall into the mud. "Your Grace," the aunt cried, "that is a magistrate." "That," said the Duke, "is a lie on paper signed by a magistrate you have deceived, and I will have it out with him myself before the week is done." He took a step toward her, and the aunt, for all her boldness, took a step back. "You dare! You come onto my land and you strike an old woman to the ground, and you lay hands on Edmund Merrick's daughter as though she were a runaway dog, after 18 years of taking my father's money to keep her in rags." His voice dropped, and somehow the quietness of it was worse than any shout. "Do you know what your mistake was, madam? This morning you were clever. The forged record was clever. Had you simply sat in your cold house and let your paper do its work, you might have given me a great deal of trouble." He gestured to the torn order in the mud, to the two men, to the carriage. "But you grew frightened. You could not wait. And so you have shown me, on my own drive, before my own steward and God's own daylight, exactly the kind of people you are. You have shown me that you will use force, that you will lie to magistrates, that you will knock down an old woman to seize a girl who is afraid of you." He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "That is not the conduct of a wronged guardian, madam. That is the conduct of a thief who feels the rope beginning to tighten." The aunt's face had gone the color of tallow. "Get off my land," the Duke said. "Take your men and your peeling carriage and go. And when next you hear from me, it will be through a lawyer, and it will concern 18 years of fraud, the forgery of a burial record, the deception of a magistrate, and an assault committed this morning upon 2 women in the presence of witnesses." He turned his back on her, which was its own kind of insult. "Run home and count your lies, madam. You are going to need to know exactly how many you have told." For a moment the aunt stood rigid, trembling with fury and fear. Her eyes found Clara, and the look in them was pure poison, the look of a cornered creature that would bite. But the 2 men would not meet the Duke's eye, and the old woman on the ground was weeping, and there were witnesses, and the moment for force had passed. She had gambled on taking the girl before the Duke could reach her, and she had lost by the length of 1 galloping horse. She climbed back into the black carriage without another word. The men followed, and the peeling carriage turned in the drive and rattled away down the road, and Clara watched it go, shaking from head to foot, and did not quite believe she was free until it had passed out of sight. Then she remembered how to breathe, and she turned, and the Duke was standing before her. For a moment neither of them spoke. "I doubted you," he said. It came out low and rough, the words of a man who had rehearsed nothing and meant everything. "This morning, for one moment when I read that cursed paper, some coward part of me, I doubted you, and you saw it, and you were right to leave." He held her eyes. He did not let himself look away, though she could see it cost him. "I have hated myself for it every hour since, not because it drove you off. Because you had trusted me, you, who trusts no one, who has had trust beaten out of you your whole life. You had given me a little of it, and I flinched. When you needed me not to." He drew a breath. "I have no right to ask you to forgive it. I only want you to know that I know what I did, and that it will not happen again, not if they bring me 100 forged papers. I know who you are, Clara Merrick. I knew it in the courtyard before I knew anything else, and I let a scrap of paper make me forget it for one breath, and I would tear that breath out of my life if I could." Clara looked at him. This proud man, coatless and mud-streaked in his own drive, humbling himself before a girl who days ago had been rubbing cold ash into her own cheeks because she was told to. She thought of what Hargrove had said at the gate. There is no such thing as a love that never falters. There is only the kind that falters and is ashamed and comes back stronger for the shame. "You came," she said finally. Her voice was unsteady. "When they had their hands on me, when I truly believed I was lost, you came down that road like the end of the world." She swallowed. "A man who thought I was a fraud does not ride bareback down 3 miles of road to save a stranger from her own guardian." "You are not a stranger," the Duke said, "and you never were a fraud, and I never should have let you believe for even 1 second that I thought otherwise." Clara was quiet a long moment. "I don't forgive you yet," she said at last, honestly, because she had promised herself she would never again say a soft thing she did not mean. "But I think I will, in time." A small, shaking breath. "That is more than I have ever been able to say to anyone." And the Duke, who might have pressed for more, who might have reached for her, only bowed his head and accepted it, as though in time were the most precious thing he had ever been given. "Then let us go back to the house," he said. "All of you." He looked to Martha, and his voice gentled. "Especially you, madam. You have carried something 18 years, I think. I should very much like to see it, for I believe you and I are going to break these people together." That evening in the warm library, they laid it all out. Martha's locket with its twin portraits and its engraving. The Duke's little gold case, carried 2 years in his pocket. The folder of the dead captain's letters. And when they set the locket's engraving beside the letters, side by side in the candlelight, even Clara could see it, the same strong slant, the same curl to the letters, the same hand. A hand that had been dust on a Spanish field for 18 years, and that no clergyman in a cold parish 3 miles away could ever have learned to forge. "It matches," the Duke said quietly. "Hargrove, look, it matches exactly." "It does, Your Grace." "It is proof, real proof, the kind a court cannot wave away." He looked up, and for the first time there was something like triumph in his tired eyes. "They gave us a forged death. We will answer it with a true hand, her father's own hand, reaching out of the grave to name his daughter." But Hargrove, ever cautious, spoke a word of warning into the hopeful room. "It is strong, Your Grace," the old man said slowly. "But consider how it will look to a magistrate the Crayles have already deceived once. 2 old lockets and a bundle of letters produced by the very household that stands to gain. They will say we forged them. They will say the old nurse was paid. It is our word and our papers against theirs." He shook his head. "To be certain, to be truly certain, past all doubt, we need something more. A witness. Someone from outside this house, with no stake in the fortune, who knew the captain, who knew the child, who can stand in a courtroom and say I saw this with my own eyes, and I was paid nothing to say it." The room was quiet. "Is there such a person?" Clara asked. "Alive after all this time?" And old Martha, who had been turning something over in her mind, lifted her head slowly. "There was a man," she said. "Your father's own sergeant, Barnaby. He was there in Spain. He carried your father off the field, they said, and sat with him at the end. He came to see your mother after to bring her the captain's things. I met him myself at the door the week before she died." Her brow furrowed. "But that was 18 years ago. They said later he'd gone for a soldier again, and then that he'd died abroad and no one ever heard more of him. I always thought him dead." "Barnaby," the Duke repeated. He rose and went to the folder and drew out one of the letters and scanned it and stopped. "Here, my father mentions him, SGT, J. Barnaby, who bore Merrick from the field and to whom I owe the chance to keep my oath at all." He looked up sharply. "If he lives, if we can find him." "Then we have our witness," Hargrove finished. "One the Crayles cannot buy, cannot frighten, and cannot explain away." "Then we find him," the Duke said. "Whatever it costs, whatever it takes." He looked at Clara, and the weariness had burned off him, and what was left was fierce and clear. "They buried you once on paper, Clara Merrick. We are going to dig up the one man alive who can prove you were never in that grave." Outside, the autumn wind rose against the windows of Thornhill, and 3 miles away, in a cold house, Clara's aunt sat by a guttering candle with poison in her heart and began, because the frightened and the cornered always do, to plan something worse. The trap was 3 weeks in the making, and it began with the Duke's absence. Word had come at last of Sergeant Barnaby, not that he was found, but that a man of that name and description had been seen, 2 years past, in a soldier's almshouse in the port city of Bristol, a hard 4 days' ride to the west. It was thin. It was old. But it was the only thread they had, and the Duke would trust no other man to follow it. He could not send a servant to persuade a witness who might have every reason to stay hidden. He had to go himself. He did not want to leave her. 4 days out, 4 days back, a day or two to find him, he told Clara the night before he rode. They were in the library where they had taken to sitting each evening, not touching, never quite touching, but near. 10 days, perhaps 12. Hargrove will be here. The house is yours. The doors will be watched and the Crayles will not come within a mile of you. He hesitated. I would not go at all, but he is the one thing that makes you safe past all doubting. I would rather leave you for 12 days now than leave you in danger for the rest of your life. I know, Clara said, and she did know, but something cold had settled in her chest that she could not name. Go find him, only come back. I will come back, the Duke said. That is a promise, and I do not break those. A pause. It runs in the family. He left at dawn. Clara stood at the window and watched him ride down the long drive until the mist took him, and the cold thing in her chest grew colder, and she did not know why. She knew why 5 days later. They were clever this time. They had learned from the drive. There was no black carriage, no hard-faced men, no seized girls screaming on the gravel. There was only, on the 5th evening of the Duke's absence, a quiet knock at the servants' door of Thornhill, and a young man in a good coat, well-spoken, presenting a card that named him as Mr. Silas Vane, come on urgent family business. Vane. The name went through the house like a draught of cold air. For the Duke's own family name was Vane, and here was a stranger at the door claiming it, asking, most courteously, to speak with the young woman who was said to be lodging in the house under a claim to the Merrick inheritance. Hargrove received him, wary as a cat. The young man was all smoothness and regret. He was, he explained, a distant cousin of his Grace, a poor branch of the Vane family, but a Vane nonetheless, and he had come with the greatest reluctance on a matter of family honor. It had reached his ears that a servant girl was residing at Thornhill, claiming to be the lost Merrick heiress. He wished her no ill. But he was in possession of information that his Grace, in his, forgive him, his evident personal regard for the young woman, might not wish to hear, and family honor compelled him to lay it before the household. What information? Hargrove said flatly. Mr. Vane's regret deepened. He understood that some months ago the young woman had come into possession of a ring, an old ring, gold, bearing the crest of a lark and a star. Was that not so? Hargrove's face did not move, but something in him went very still. That ring, said Mr. Vane sadly, is not a Merrick heirloom, sir, or rather it was once, but it did not come to the young woman by inheritance. It was stolen 18 years ago from the effects of the late Captain Merrick, which passed at his death into the keeping of the Vane family, into the keeping of his Grace's own late father. A number of items went missing from that estate over the years, small things, valuable things, and that ring was among them. He spread his hands. I do not say the young woman stole it herself, sir. She was an infant. I say only that she has been coached, by whoever raised her, to use a stolen Vane heirloom as false proof of a claim to a dead heiress's name. And I have brought the old estate inventory to prove the ring was Vane property. It can be examined by any magistrate you please. He produced a paper. Old, official, browned with age. Clara would have known the look of it had she been in the room. It was the twin of the burial record. Another forgery aged in a cold parish by a frightened clergyman's hand. And on it, entered among the effects of the late captain, held in trust by the Vane estate, one gold ring, crest of lark and star. Reported stolen 18 years ago. You will understand my position, sir, Mr. Vane said gently. If the young woman is what she claims, she has nothing to fear. Let the courts decide it in the fullness of time. But she is at present in possession of property reported stolen from this very house. And I am afraid that if the matter is not addressed, I shall have no choice as a Vane but to lay in information before the magistrate that a servant girl of no proven family is living at Thornhill, wearing a stolen jewel and passing herself off as the heir to a fortune. His smile was very soft. I should so much rather it did not come to a constable and a public arrest. Think of the scandal to His Grace's name. But that, of course, is not for me to decide. It is for the young woman. And for you. And there it was. The whole trap sprung at last in a well-spoken young man's regretful voice. It was beautiful in its cruelty. Clara saw it clearly when Hargrove came to her white-faced and told her all. If she kept the ring, they would have her arrested for theft. A servant girl caught wearing a stolen jewel, the Duke's name dragged through the mud, and every word she ever spoke afterward the word of a proven thief. And if she gave the ring up to prove her good faith, then she surrendered the single strongest thing she owned, her father's own ring, into the hands of the very people forging papers to erase her. Either way she lost. Either way they took it from her freedom or her proof. He is no more a Vane than I am, Clara said. Her hands had begun to shake. It's the Crails. It has to be. A hired man, a false name, they've simply put a smooth coat on the same old lie. I have no doubt of it, Hargrove said grimly. But doubt is not proof, Miss Merrick. And the man is clever and the paper looks real, and His Grace is 4 days' ride away with no way to reach him. He pressed his old hand to his brow. If I turn this Vane away, he goes to the magistrate tonight and swears out a warrant, and by morning there is a constable at our door with a lawful right to search you and take the ring by force, and to take you on a charge of theft if he chooses. And the magistrate is the same weak fool the Crails already gulled once with their madness order. He will not stand against them, not without His Grace here to make him. Clara sank into a chair. The old cold was all around her now, closing over her head like water. 12 days, the Duke had said. She had counted them. He was 5 days gone. Even if he found Barnaby that very night and turned his horse around at once, he could not be back for a week. And in a week she could be in a cell, charged with theft, her ring in a magistrate's evidence box, her name, her true name, her father's name, made a joke and a scandal across the whole county. By the time the Duke returned with his witness, it might not matter that she was Clara Merrick. She would be Clara Merrick, the thief. The pretender who wore a stolen ring. And no witness, however honest, could scrub a public arrest away. They had thought of everything, again, always. What do I do? She whispered. Hargrove, tell me what to do. And the old man, who had served the family 40 years and never once been at a loss, stood in the candlelight with no answer to give her, because, for the first time, there was none. That was when Martha spoke. She had been sitting quietly in the corner all this while, a small black shape in the shadows, and they had half forgotten she was there. Now she rose, leaning on her stick, and there was something on her old face that had not been there before. There is a thing I have never told you, child, she said. I did not tell you because it grieved me and because I did not think it mattered, but it matters now. She came forward into the light. When your mother was dying, when she gave me the locket and made me swear, she told me something else. She was out of her wits with the fever by then, and I thought it only the fever talking. But she said it 3 times so that I would not forget. She said, Martha. If they ever try to take her name from her, if they ever call my daughter a liar, tell them to look at the child herself. Tell them she carries the proof in her own skin. Clara went very still. In my own skin. You have a mark, child, Martha said softly. You were born with it. Here she touched her own left shoulder at the back below the blade. A birthmark dark, shaped like a little crescent moon. The Merrick mark your mother called it. Her own father had it and his mother before him. It runs in the blood and it breeds true, one child in every generation. Your mother had it herself in the very same place. And you were born with it, plain as day. I saw it the night you came into the world. Her old eyes filled. They can forge a burial. They can forge an inventory. They can hire a smooth young man to call himself Vane. But they cannot forge the mark your grandfather carried in the place your mother carried it on the body of the child they swore was dead. It is written in you, Clara, where no forger's pen can reach." The room was silent. And slowly, Hargrove began to smile. The second time Clara had seen it, and this time there was iron in it. "A mark that runs in the Merrick line," he said, "in a fixed place, that the true child would carry and no impostor could counterfeit." He looked at Clara. "Miss Merrick, is it there? Have you such a mark?" Clara reached back over her own shoulder to the place Martha had touched. She had never thought of it. It had always simply been there, a small dark crescent she could not properly see, that she had never once in her life had cause to consider. "Yes," she whispered, "it's there, it's always been there." "Then hear me," Hargrove said, and the strength had come back into his voice, the voice of a man who has found his footing on ground he thought was falling away. "We do not give this vein the ring, and we do not let him take you. We give him one thing only, a message. You will tell him this, Miss Merrick, in your own words and your own voice, and I will stand beside you while you say it." His eyes gleamed. "You will tell him that you welcome the magistrate, that you invite the constable, that you will happily be examined publicly before as many respectable witnesses as the county cares to send, because you carry on your body the hereditary mark of the Merrick line, in the place it has always fallen, and you will be glad to have a physician confirm it before God and the law. And then you will ask him, very sweetly, whether his master, his true master, the one who is no more a vein than the cat, would truly like this matter brought before a public examination, or whether he would prefer to take his forged inventory and his false name and be gone before his grace returns to ask him some questions of his own." Clara looked at the old man, and for the first time since the Duke had ridden into the mist, the cold in her chest cracked and something warm came through it. Because she understood. They had built their whole trap on paper, on things that could be forged and aged and sworn to by frightened men. And against all their paper, she had one thing they had never counted on and could never counterfeit, the truth, written into her own body before she could speak, by nothing but blood. "Send him in," Clara said, and she stood and she straightened her back, and for the first time in her life she did not feel small. "I'll tell him myself." The false vein did not come back. Clara had faced him in the great hall, with Hargrove at her shoulder and Martha in the doorway, and she had said every word the old steward gave her, and then some of her own. She had told the smooth young man that she would welcome the magistrate, welcome the constable, welcome a physician's examination before the whole county, because she carried the Merrick mark in her own skin, where his master's forged papers could never reach. And she had watched the smoothness slide off his face like wax off a candle. He had come expecting a frightened servant girl who would either surrender her ring or be dragged to a cell. He had not expected to be looked in the eye and invited to a public examination he could not survive. He had left within the hour, and he had not gone to any magistrate because a public examination was the one thing his masters could not risk. Their whole game was paper and whisper, forgery and fear. Drag it into daylight before honest witnesses and a physician's plain eyes, and it fell apart. So the Crayles changed their game one final time. If they could not have Clara arrested quietly and could not steal her proof, then they would do the only thing left to the cornered. They would strike in public, fast and loud, before the Duke returned, and try to shatter her name past mending in a single stroke, so that no witness and no birthmark could ever put it back together. Their chance came 6 days later, and it came, of all places, at a ball. It was not the Duke's ball. He was still away, 9 days gone now, with no word, and Clara had begun to wake in the night straining to hear hoofbeats on the drive. The ball belonged to Lady Pembroke, a great lady of the county, the sort of woman whose invitations could not be refused, and whose drawing room could make or break a reputation in an evening. And Lady Pembroke had invited the household of Thornhill. Hargrove had been against Clara going at all, but the invitation had been pointed and public, and to refuse it would have looked like hiding, and hiding, they all knew, was what a guilty pretender would do. If Clara Merrick was who she said she was, she must be able to walk into a county drawing room with her head up. So she went. In a gown of deep green that made her gray eyes shine, with her mother's locket at her throat and her father's ring on her finger, worn openly now, for the first time, for all the world to see, and Martha and Hargrove beside her like two old guardians out of a fairy tale. For an hour, it was the most beautiful evening of her life. And then the Crayles arrived. They came late on purpose when the rooms were full and the candles high and everyone who mattered in the county was gathered to see. Clara's aunt in black and silver, Prudence, pale and sharp in a gown too fine for her family's ruined fortunes, and with them a stranger, a heavy, prosperous-looking man in a magistrate's sober coat, whom the aunt introduced, in a voice pitched to Carrie, as her dear friend and the county's own upholder of the law. The aunt did not go to Clara. That was not the plan. She went instead to Lady Pembroke, and she began, sweetly, sorrowfully, loudly enough for a widening circle to hear, to grieve. She grieved that such a scandal should touch dear Lady Pembroke's house. She grieved that a common servant girl from her own household, a girl she had fed and clothed out of Christian charity for 18 years, had run off to Thornhill, and there imposed upon a grieving duke with a wicked and calculated lie. She grieved to say it, but the girl was no Merrick. The true Merrick child had died in infancy. God rest her, and here was the burial record to prove it, entered in the parish book in the year of our Lord, and she had a copy. She would pass it round, let honest people see. She grieved that the poor deceived duke in his loneliness had been so taken in by a scheming girl's pretty face that he could no longer see the fraud beneath it. And she grieved, most of all, here her voice broke with practiced sorrow, that the girl even now wore upon her hand a ring reported stolen from the duke's own family 18 years ago. And did honest people not know what to call a person who wore stolen jewels and a dead child's name? The word she used rang out across the hushed and crowded room, clear as a struck bell. Thief. The whispers began at once. Clara stood in her green gown in the middle of Lady Pembroke's drawing room and felt every eye in the county turn upon her, and she watched the warmth go out of 100 faces and something colder and hungrier come into them. She had known scandal her whole life as a thing done to her in private, behind locked doors. She had never felt it done in public, in a bright room full of strangers, all at once, the terrible swift turning of a crowd. It was like drowning in the open air. She's very quiet, someone murmured. Guilt, no doubt. Wearing the stolen ring bold as brass. And where is the Duke? Fled the shame, I shouldn't wonder. Clara could not speak. The old cold had her by the throat, every eye, every whisper, and her aunt watching her drown with the ghost of a smile upon her lips, because this was the masterstroke, this was the thing no birthmark could undo. A physician might confirm a mark in a quiet room a month from now. But this public branding before the whole county would be done in an instant and would never be undone. By the time any court ruled on any birthmark, everyone in the county would already know the story. The servant thief who fooled the lonely Duke. It would cling to her name forever, true or not. Have you nothing to say for yourself, girl? The aunt's magistrate friend boomed, playing his part. No answer to the charge. Clara opened her mouth. No words came. Beside her, she felt Hargrove draw breath to fight a battle he could not win. One old steward's word against a magistrate and a forged paper before a crowd already turned. And then the great doors at the far end of Lady Pembroke's ballroom opened. The Duke of Thornhill stood in the doorway. He was travel-stained and unshaven, his boots gray with the mud of a hard road ridden without rest. He had come. It was plain, straight from the saddle, not even pausing to change, as though he had ridden the last 4 days knowing he might arrive too late. His eyes swept the room once and found Clara in her green gown, ringed by whispers, white as her own linen. and Clara, who had been drowning, felt her heart lurch back to life at the sight of him. But it was not the Duke alone in the doorway. Beside him stood a man Clara had never seen. Old, near 70, but upright still, broad in the shoulder, with a soldier's bearing that age had bent but not broken. He wore a plain, worn coat, and his weathered face was grave, and he leaned on a stick, and he was looking across the whole grand, glittering room at Clara with an expression that stopped her breath. He was looking at her the way Martha had looked at her at the gate, the way the Duke had looked in the courtyard, as though he were seeing the dead walk. The Duke's voice carried down the length of the silenced room, quiet, but it reached every corner. "I am sorry to arrive so late, Lady Pembroke," he said, "and in such a state. I have ridden 4 days without proper rest, and I would not have burst into your house so, save that I was told." His eyes moved to the aunt and went cold as deep water, that certain accusations were to be made here tonight against a member of my household. It seems I am not too late to hear them after all. The aunt recovered quickly. "Your Grace, I am glad you are come, glad you may at last hear the truth of the girl you have sheltered. I have this very evening laid the proof before these good people, the burial record, the stolen ring, the whole sad fraud." "The whole sad fraud," the Duke repeated. "Yes, let us speak of that." He came forward into the room, and the crowd parted before him, and the old soldier came with him, slow and steady on his stick. "You have shown these good people a burial record, entered, you say, 18 years ago in your parish book, recording the death in infancy of the true Merrick child." He stopped before her. "Only I have stood in that very churchyard, madam, 2 years ago with the parish register in my own 2 hands, and there was no such record in it. None. The page you have shown tonight was written in the last month. I would stake my name upon it." "That is easily said, Your Grace," the aunt returned, but a thread of strain had come into her voice. "Your word against the parish book." "Not my word alone." The Duke turned. "May I present to this company a gentleman who has ridden a great distance to be here, Sergeant John Barnaby, late of His Majesty's infantry, who served 18 years ago under a certain Captain Edmund Merrick, who carried that captain, wounded, from the field at Talavera, and who sat beside him in a Spanish farmhouse and held his hand while he died." The room had gone utterly silent now. Even the whispers had stopped. The old soldier stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice was rough and low, and carried the plain weight of a man who has never in his life learned how to lie prettily. "I knew Ned Merrick," Barnaby said. "Best officer I ever served and the best man. I bore him off the field with my own arms, and I sat with him 3 days while the wound took him, and I heard the last words he ever spoke on this earth." His weathered eyes were fixed on Clara now, and they had begun to shine. He had a wife in England and a baby girl he'd never rightly seen, and at the last, all he could speak of was the child. He made the old Duke swear to keep her safe. I heard that oath sworn, I was in the room, and then when the Duke had gone out, he said to me, quiet-like, just to me, "Barnaby, if you ever go home and if you ever find my girl, you'll know her. She's got her mother's eyes, gray as a winter sea, and she's got the Merrick mark on her back of the left shoulder, a little dark moon, same as her ma, same as her ma's father. You'll know my girl by that mark, Barnaby. You'll know her anywhere." He took another step toward Clara. The whole county held its breath. "I went to see the captain's widow after," Barnaby went on, "to bring her his things. But the fever had her, poor lady, and she died within the week, and they turned me from the door and said the child had died too. I believed it 18 years. I went for a soldier again, and I near died abroad myself, and I gave up thinking of it." His voice cracked. "And then 2 weeks passed. A Duke walks into a soldier's almshouse in Bristol and asks me, 'Does the name Merrick mean aught to you?' And he shows me a little painted portrait of a woman with gray eyes, and I thought my old heart would stop." He was standing before Clara now. Tears ran openly down the deep lines of his face. Because it was her, it was Ned's Margaret, and he tells me she lived, the baby. She lived and she's grown and she's standing in a room in Thornhill wearing her father's ring. His voice dropped to almost nothing. May I, miss? I have waited 18 years to know if I would keep my captain's charge. May I see? Clara could not speak, she could only nod. And there, in the middle of Lady Pembroke's glittering ballroom, before the assembled gentry of the whole county, the old sergeant stepped behind her, and with a soldier's care, he drew aside the edge of her green gown at the back of her left shoulder. And he made a sound that was half a sob and half a laugh, the very sound Martha had made at the gate. There, he said hoarsely to the whole silent room. There it is, the Merrick mark, back of the left shoulder, a little dark moon, just as her father told me with his dying breath 18 years ago in a country half the world away where no living soul in this room could have gone to learn it and no pen could ever have forged it onto her skin. He straightened and turned and faced the crowd, and his rough old voice rang out like a command on a parade ground. This is Ned Merrick's daughter. I'll swear it before any court in England, on the book, on my life, and I'll take not one penny for the swearing. This is the captain's girl, and any soul that calls her thief or liar calls a dying hero's last words a lie and answers to me for it. The room erupted. And in the midst of it, Clara saw her aunt's face, saw the exact moment the woman understood that it was over, that no forged paper on earth could stand against a dying father's words carried home in an honest man's mouth and confirmed in the child's own skin. She saw the aunt's hand go to her throat. She saw Prudence begin, silently, to back toward the doors. But it was not quite over, not yet. Because a cornered creature bites hardest at the very end, and the aunt, seeing everything lost, drew one last breath and played the only card that cruelty had left her. Sentiment, she cried over the noise, her voice shrill and desperate now. A soldier's sentiment and an old woman's tears is that your proof? A mark on a shoulder that any child might carry, a birthmark proves nothing, half the county has such a thing. You have a paid soldier, a paid nurse, and a duke besotted past all sense, but where is the law? Where is a single paper of proof that is not this house's own word? I have a parish record. What have you but a story? And for one moment, one last, cruel, held breath, the crowd wavered. Because she was not wholly wrong and the frightened crowd knew it. A birthmark, a soldier, a nurse, all of them the word of Thornhill's own household against an official-looking paper. It could still, even now, come down to whose word the county chose to believe. The Duke opened his mouth to answer. But it was Hargrove who stepped forward. Old Hargrove, who had served the family 40 years, who had said so little all this night, and who now drew from his coat a packet of papers, sealed in faded red wax, and held it up so the candlelight caught it. You ask for law, madam, the old steward said. You ask for a paper that is not this house's word. His eyes were bright and terrible. Then I am very glad at last to give you one. Hargrove broke the wax seal in the silence of Lady Pembroke's ballroom, and the small dry crack of it was the only sound in the room. 18 years ago, the old steward said, the late Duke of Thornhill sent for me to his study. He was newly home from the war and grieving, and he had a charge to keep. He gave me these papers with his own hands, and he told me to guard them past his own life if I must, for a day might come, he said, when a wrong would need righting, and only the truth in writing could right it. Hargrove lifted his eyes to the aunt. I have kept them 18 years, madam. I confess I had near forgotten what a weapon they would prove. But you asked me for a paper that is not this house's word. Let us see whether these will serve. He unfolded the first. Sworn deposition, he said, in the late Duke's own hand, witnessed and sealed before a king's magistrate not of this county, dated the year of the captain's death. In it his grace sets down the oath he swore at Talavera, to keep safe the daughter of Captain Edmund Merrick, to raise her as his own blood, and to see her want for nothing so long as he lived. Hargrove turned the page toward the crowd, showing the seal, the signatures, the brown but unforged ink of 18 years. This is not sentiment, madam. This is a duke's sworn word filed with the law the year the child was born. It names her. It names her father. It records that she lived. A murmur ran through the room, a different murmur now, the sound of a crowd beginning to turn back. That proves only that a child existed, the aunt said, but her voice had thinned. It does not prove this girl. No, Hargrove agreed. By itself it does not, so let us have the second paper. He drew it out. The accounts. The late Duke's private ledger of a certain quarterly payment, a pension paid faithfully every quarter for 18 years to the household of one Mrs. Crail for the care and keeping of the Merrick child. He held it high. Here are the entries, madam, in the Duke's own steward's hand, in my hand, for I wrote many of them myself. 18 years of payments, received and signed for, by you. The aunt's face had gone gray. And here, Hargrove's voice dropped and hardened and drove the point home like a nail. Here is the entry made in the very quarter you wrote to the late Duke to tell him the child had died of a fever. Here is your letter, pasted beside it in your own hand, begging that the payments continue a little longer, to cover the costs of the poor infant's burial and your family's grief. He looked up, and his old eyes were merciless. You told a grieving man his ward was dead and in her grave. And in the same breath, on the same page, you asked him to keep paying you for her keep. And he did, madam. For 18 years he went on paying you to feed and clothe and school a child you swore was in the ground, because some part of that good man could not stop hoping she lived. You took his money for a burial that never happened, and his money for a childhood you spent in cruelty, and you have the gall to stand in this room and ask where is the law. He let the silence stretch. The law, madam, is written here in your own hand, that you cannot have buried the child in the year you claim, because you went on drawing her keep for 18 years after. A dead child does not need feeding, but you build a duke for both. The room had turned entirely now. Clara could feel it. The cold, hungry crowd that had wanted to see her drown was rounding, all at once, upon the woman who had tried to drown her. It was a terrible thing to watch a crowd turn. She had been on the wrong side of it an hour ago. She would not have wished even her aunt on the right side of it now, but she did not look away. You have a paper, the aunt said, and now her voice was breaking. I have a paper. It is one house's ledger against a parish record entered in a church book by an ordained clergyman of the Church of England, who will swear to it before God. Well, said the Duke. He had been silent through all of this, letting his steward drive the blade. Now he spoke, and there was something in his quiet voice that made the aunt flinch as if struck. Reverend Combe, the Duke said, of your own parish, the clergyman whose hand wrote the burial record you have passed round this room tonight, and I have no doubt the stolen ring inventory a smooth young man brought to my door a fortnight past. He came a step closer. I stopped in that parish on my road home, madam. Yesterday, I called upon the Reverend Combe myself. I found a frightened man with a great many debts and a very uneasy conscience, a man who had done your family a service once years ago, and lived in dread of the day it should come to light. The Duke's mouth was a hard line. I did not threaten him. I did not need to. I only laid before him what I already knew, and I told him that the matter was going to a king's court whether he willed it or no, and that he might choose tonight whether he entered that court as a witness or as a forger. And I asked him one question, whether he would put his hand on the book in open court, and swear that he had entered that burial record 18 years ago and not 18 days. The Duke turned and gestured toward the great doors. You may ask him yourself, madam. He has ridden the last 4 days at my side, and he is waiting in Lady Pembroke's hall. Shall I call him in? Shall we let the whole county hear an ordained clergyman of the Church of England tell us, under oath, in what year he truly wrote that page? And that broke her. Clara watched it happen, watched 18 years of lies collapse inward all at once behind her aunt's eyes. The woman looked to the false magistrate friend, who had already begun edging away, wanting no part of what was coming. She looked to Prudence, who had backed against the wall with both hands pressed to her mouth. She looked round the ballroom, at the turned faces, the cold crowd, the assembled gentry of the county who an hour ago had been ready to name Clara a thief, and now looked upon the aunt as one looks upon something found under a lifted stone. There was nowhere left to go. Every road out was a forgery, and every forgery was about to be sworn against in open court by the very men she had bought. She was nothing, the aunt said. It came out low and strange, and the room stilled to hear it. She was not defending herself any longer. Something had cracked, and the truth was leaking out of her, 18 years of it, whether she willed it or no. She was nothing to us. A cousin's brat foisted on our charity with a duke's fortune promised her that should by rights have, she caught herself, but too late. The whole room had heard the shape of it. We were poor. We had a daughter of our own to see settled. And there was all that money quarter after quarter, and no one ever came to see the child, no one ever asked. It was so easy. Tell them she died. Keep the payments. Keep her small, keep her hidden, keep her ignorant, and no one would ever. Her voice rose, wild now. And it would have held. It held 18 years. It would have held forever if that man had not gone walking through his own courtyard and stopped. Because you rubbed ash on her face, the Duke said quietly, to keep me from seeing it. The aunt stared at him. That was your undoing, madam, he said. Not the ledger, not the deposition, not the sergeant, nor the mark, nor the clergyman. Those only proved what was already certain. His eyes found Clara's across the room and held them. You knew, you see. 18 years ago you must have known that if the child was ever truly seen by anyone who had loved her mother or her father, the whole lie would fall. So you kept her hidden. And when at last you could hide her no longer, when you were forced to send her out into the world for a single day, you could not simply let her go plain-faced and pray, no. You had to smear cold ash across the one thing you had spent 18 years fearing. He shook his head slowly. You could not bear to trust to chance. And so, on the very morning it mattered most, you took a girl with her mother's whole face, and you made certain a duke would notice something wrong with her. A servant streaked with ash in a line of clean servants. You did not hide her, madam. You marked her out. You may as well have pointed. Clara's breath caught. She had never thought of it that way. All her life the ash had been her shame, the proof of how little she was worth. And the Duke had just turned it, before the whole county, into the single thread that had unraveled everything, the too clever cruelty that had betrayed itself. They had tried so hard to make her forgettable that they had made her the only thing in the courtyard he could not forget. Take them, said Lady Pembroke. The great lady had risen from her chair, and her voice cut through the room with the authority of a woman whose word was law in that county. She was looking at the Crayles as though they had tracked filth across her floor. Fetch a constable, a true one, not this creature. A contemptuous glance at the false magistrate, now halfway to the door, and let these people be held to answer for it. Forgery, fraud, perjury sworn and perjury suborned. 18 years of a child's stolen life. Her cold gaze swept them. Not in my house, not in my county, get them out of my sight. And so it ended, as such things end, not with a duel or a thunderclap, but with the quiet, crushing weight of the law and a roomful of turned backs. Clara's aunt was led from Lady Pembroke's ballroom white and silent, all her cleverness spent, all her lies laid bare on the parquet floor for the county to step over. Prudence went after her, weeping now, clutching at the sleeves of people who drew away from her, the fine marriage she had schemed for gone forever, her name ruined as surely as she had tried to ruin Clara's, and no forged paper left to save her. The false Vane was never found. He had done his work and vanished, as hired men do. And the frightened Reverend Coombe, waiting in the hall, wept with a kind of relief when they told him he would be a witness and not a forger, as though a weight he had carried for 18 years had finally been lifted from a weak man's shoulders. It was over. After 18 years it was truly over. Clara stood in the middle of the bright room in her green gown, with her father's ring on her hand and her mother's locket at her throat, and the Merrick mark on her shoulder that no one would ever again dare to question. The county that had wanted to see her drown was pressing close now, all smiles, all warmth, eager to have been her friend all along. Lady Pembroke herself took her hand and called her my dear. She was Clara Merrick. Everyone knew it. No one would ever again send her to a scullery, or lock her in a pantry, or rub cold ash into her face. She had won. So she could not understand why, in the middle of all that warmth and light, she felt so strangely, quietly alone. It was later, much later, when the crowd had thinned and the candles had burned low, that the Duke found her by a tall window, a little apart from the noise, looking out at the dark. "You have not smiled," he said, "not once all evening, and you of all people have earned the right to it tonight." Clara was quiet a moment. "I keep waiting to feel it," she said, "the happiness. I thought all my life, I thought if only they knew who I really was, if only someone saw, I thought it would feel like the sun coming up." She turned the ring slowly on her finger. "And now they all know, and it does not feel like the sun. It feels like," she searched for it, "it feels like being handed back something that was stolen from me so long ago that I no longer know how to hold it. I have a name now. A father who was a hero, a mother who loved me, a fortune, a place in the world, and I am grateful. But I do not know that girl, the Merrick heiress, the one they're all smiling at. I have never been her. I have only ever been the girl in the ash." Her voice dropped. "I am afraid, Your Grace, that they gave me my life back too late to live it." The Duke was silent for a long moment. "May I say a thing," he said, "that I have no right to say?" Clara looked at him. "When I rode into that ballroom tonight," he said slowly, "and saw you standing there alone with the whole county turned against you, I have never in my life been so afraid. Not in the war, not at my father's deathbed. Nothing has ever frightened me as that did." He drew a breath. "And in that moment I understood something I had been refusing to understand for weeks, that I did not ride 4 days without sleep to keep my father's oath. I did not near kill my horse on the Bristol road to right an old wrong, or to settle a debt of honor, or for any noble reason I might name to myself in the dark." He held her eyes, and for once the proud, careful man let her see all the way down. "I did it because the thought of a world with you not safe in it had become unbearable to me. That is not duty, Clara. I have been telling myself it was duty since the day I wiped the ash from your face. It was never duty. It was the other thing. The thing I have no right to name to you, not now, not after I doubted you, not while you are only just free." Clara's heart had begun to pound. "Then don't name it," she said softly. "Not tonight." She looked up at him. "I am not ready to hear it tonight. I have only been myself for a few hours. I do not yet know how to be Clara Merrick, let alone anything more. And you, a small, unsteady breath, you doubted me. For one moment you doubted me, and I have not forgotten it, and I will not pretend I have. I told you once I thought I would forgive it in time. I meant it. But time is a thing I have never once in my life been given freely, and I find I should like, for once, to take some." The Duke bowed his head. "Then take it," he said. "Take all of it. There is no oath in this, Clara. I want you to understand that above all things. Whatever I feel, you owe me nothing for it. Not gratitude, not your hand, not a single hour of your freedom. You have spent your whole life belonging to people who claimed you. I will not be one more. If you walk out of Thornhill tomorrow and never look back, you will go with your name, your fortune, and every protection I can give you, and you will owe me not one thing in return. That is a promise, and I do not break those." And Clara looked at him, at this man who had every power in the county, who could have simply kept her out of gratitude and called it kindness, and who instead was standing before her offering her the one thing no one had ever offered her in all her life: the freedom to leave. She did not answer him. She did not trust herself to. But something in her chest, some old locked and frozen thing, shifted very slightly, the smallest crack, the first thin thread of thaw. She only did not know, yet, whether she would stay to see the spring. Clara left Thornhill on a bright, cold morning 3 weeks later. She did it properly, and she did it free. The Duke had kept every word of his promise and more. Within a fortnight of the ball, the law had done its slow, certain work. The deposition, the ledgers, the sergeant's sworn word, the physician's plain confirmation of the mark, and the wretched Reverend Coombs' tearful testimony had all gone before a king's court, and Clara Merrick had been recognized in the eyes of the law as the true and only daughter of the late Captain Edmund Merrick, heiress to the name, and to the fortune the old Duke had set aside for her 18 years before, grown now to a sum that made her, of a sudden, a woman of independent means. Independent, that was the word that mattered. She had money of her own now, and a name of her own, and she needed no one's charity and no one's protection and no one's leave. For the first time in her life, Clara Merrick belonged to no one but herself. And so she chose to go. She took a house, a modest, pretty house, in a town some miles from Thornhill, with a garden and good light and a room where old Martha could sit by the fire and be cared for at last, after 18 years of searching. She took Martha with her, of course. She would sooner have parted with her own right hand. And she meant to live there quietly and learn, slowly in her own time, how to be a person who was free. The Duke did not try to stop her. That was the thing she kept turning over in the weeks of settling in. He had not tried to stop her. He had helped her, sent his own men to see the house made ready, his own steward to arrange her affairs, and had asked in return for nothing. He had not visited. He had not written, save once, a short and formal note wishing her well in her new home and reminding her, in a single careful line, that Thornhill's door stood always open to her should she ever wish to walk through it, and that she was under no obligation ever to do so. No obligation. He put it in writing, as though he feared even a letter might weigh on her like a debt. Clara read that note more times than she would ever have admitted. She was free. She had wanted her whole life to be free, and she was gloriously, completely free, and she found to her great confusion that freedom by itself was a colder thing than she had imagined. She sat in her pretty house with her own money and her own name, and she was safe, and she was warm, and no one would ever hurt her again. And she thought about a tall, dark, tired man walking through his own courtyard, stopping and wiping ash from a servant's cheek. She thought about it a great deal. "You are pining," Martha said one evening, with the bluntness of the very old, "and it is foolish to pine for a thing you have only to reach out and take." "I am not pining," Clara said. "I am free." "You are both," said Martha, "and only one of them is making you unhappy." Clara said nothing. "Child," the old woman said more gently, "I have watched you 3 weeks now, safe and settled and grieving something you'll not name, so I will name it for you since I am too old to be careful. You are afraid, not of him, of yourself. All your life belonging to someone meant being owned, being small, being hurt. And now here is a man who loves you and asks nothing and offers everything, and holds the door wide and swears you may go whenever you please, and it terrifies you worse than any cruelty, because you do not know how to give your heart to someone who will not cage it. You only ever learn the cage." Martha reached over and took her hand. "But you are free now, my Clara. That is what free means. It does not mean being alone. It means the door is open, and you may choose to stay, not because you are trapped, but because you wish to. He gave you that. He gave you the one gift no one else ever thought to give you. Do not let your fear throw it in the fire." Clara looked into the fire for a long while. "He doubted me," she said at last, quietly. It was the last stone, the one she had been carrying since the morning of the forged paper. Once, for a moment. "I," said Martha, "and spent the rest of his days ashamed of it, and rode 4 days without sleep to save you, and stood before the whole county and turned your shame into your salvation, and then held the door open and let you walk away free rather than press you for a thing you were not ready to give." The old woman squeezed her hand. "Child, There is no love that never falters once. There is only the love that is sorry for it and better for it after. The rest is just a story people tell who have never truly loved at all. Clara went very still. Because it was, almost word for word, what Hargrove had said to her at the gate on the worst morning of her life. There is no such thing as a love that never falters. There is only the kind that falters and is ashamed and comes back stronger for the shame. Two old people, who had lived long lives and loved and lost and seen the whole shape of things, telling her the same truth from two different mouths. She sat with it, and slowly in the warmth of the fire, the last frozen thing in her chest began, at long last, to thaw. She went back to Thornhill on the first true morning of spring. She did not send word ahead. She rode out early, alone in a carriage of her own now, up the long drive she had once walked down in a torn gray shawl with nothing in the world but a ring on a string. The gardens were coming green. The heron was back at the lower pond. She saw it as she passed, standing still and patient in the shallows, and something in her steadied at the sight of it. The Duke was in the gardens. Of course he was. She had somehow known he would be out at the end of the long yew walk, where they had taken their first silent walks together, standing with his hands behind his back exactly as he had stood the very first day, looking at nothing. He turned when he heard the gravel, and when he saw her, when he saw who it was, stepping down from the carriage in the spring light, he went utterly still, in the way she had come to know, the stillness of a man who does not dare to hope. He did not come to her. Even now, even here, he held to his promise. He would not close the distance, would not presume, would not so much as take a step that might feel to her like a claim. He simply stood and waited and let her choose. So Clara crossed the garden to him. She stopped an arm's length away, the same distance he had once stood from her in the library, holding a little gold portrait of a woman with her face. For a moment neither of them spoke. A blackbird sang somewhere in the greening hedges. "You held the door open," she said at last. "I did. For 3 weeks, for a lifetime, you said, however long I liked." "However long you liked," he agreed. His voice was low and careful. "The offer does not expire, Clara. It is not a trap that closes. You may go on being free of me for 50 years, and the door will still stand open on the last of them." "I know," she said. "That is why I came back." The Duke's breath caught, but still he did not move. Still he would not let himself believe it, would not reach for a thing not clearly given. "I spent my whole life," Clara said, "belonging to people who owned me, who kept me small so that I could not leave. And when at last I was free, truly free, free of everyone, free of even you, I found that the thing I wanted was the one thing no cage could ever have given me." She looked up into his dark eyes. "I wanted to choose it. I wanted to stand in the open with the door wide behind me and every road in the world before me and no one holding me at all, and to choose you. Freely. Because it is the only way I have ever wanted anything and never once been allowed to. Not because I owe you, not because I am grateful, not because I am trapped." Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. "Because I love you, and because a free woman may love whom she pleases. And it pleases me to love you, Sebastian Vane, you, who wiped the ash from my face and asked my name when the whole world had decided I did not have one." The Duke of Thornhill, proud, hard, untouchable, looked at her with his heart in his eyes and his hope no longer hidden, and when he spoke his voice was not quite steady. "Then I may say it," he said, "the thing I had no right to name." "You may say it," Clara whispered. "I love you," he said. "I have loved you since the courtyard, before I knew your name, before I knew anything but that the ground had moved beneath me. I have loved you badly and well, and I have failed you once and will spend my life not failing you again. And I want to marry you, Clara Merrick, not to raise you up, for you need no raising. You are already everything you were ever meant to be. I want to marry you as an equal stands beside an equal, your name beside mine. Your fortune your own, to keep or give as you please. Your freedom untouched always, so that every morning of our lives you might wake and choose to stay as you chose today. He drew a breath. Will you have me? And Clara smiled. The smile the county had waited all that long ball to see. The smile that had been frozen somewhere inside her since before she could remember, breaking now across her whole face like the first true morning of spring. I will, she said. The Duke reached out then, slowly, the way he had reached out that first day in the courtyard, careful, as though uncovering something precious. But this time it was not ash he wiped from her cheek. It was a single tear, caught bright at the corner of her eye, spilling over in the spring light. He brushed it gently away with his thumb, exactly as he had brushed away the gray grime on the worst morning of her life. And Clara understood that they had come all the way round, back to where it began, to the very first thing he had ever done for her. "What is your name?" he asked her softly. The same words. The very same words he had spoken to a nameless girl in a courtyard, streaked with ash, praying to be forgettable. But this time Clara knew the answer. This time no one had to fear it, or hide it, or forge it away. This time it was hers, freely held and freely given. "Clara Merrick," she said, "and soon, if you'll still have me, Clara Vane." "I'll have you," the Duke said, "every day of my life, and count each one a gift." And there in the greening garden, at the end of the long yew walk where they had once walked in silence and grief, with the heron patient in the shallows and the blackbird singing in the hedge and the whole bright spring rising up around them, the Duke of Thornhill kissed the girl he had once known only as the ash on a servant's face. And Clara Merrick, who had been nobody, who had been nothing, who had been forgettable, kissed him back with her whole free heart, and was, at long and glorious last, exactly where she chose to be. 4 years later, on a warm afternoon in early summer, a small boy ran the length of the long yew walk at Thornhill, shrieking with laughter, chased by an old soldier who was pretending, very badly, not to be able to catch him. "You'll not escape me, young sir," roared Sergeant Barnaby, thumping along on his stick with a speed that belied his years. "I've run down Frenchmen quicker than you." "You have not," the boy cried, delighted. "Mama says you're too old to catch a cold." "Does she now? Does she indeed?" The boy's name was Edmund. Edmund Vane, 3 years old, dark-haired, with wide-set eyes of an unusual gray-green that his grandmother, had she lived to see them, would have known at a single glance. He had been named for a grandfather he would never meet, a captain who had died on a Spanish field asking with his last breath after a daughter he had never rightly seen. But the daughter had lived. And now the captain's name ran laughing through a green English garden in the sunshine, and there was a kind of justice in that which no court could ever have handed down. Clara watched from the terrace, and she was smiling. She smiled easily now. It had taken time. The thaw of a whole frozen childhood does not come in a single spring, but it had come. She was the Duchess of Thornhill these 4 years, and she wore it the way she wore everything now, lightly, freely, as a thing she had chosen rather than a thing done to her. She managed the estate's charities herself and had opened a school in the village for the children of the poor, and there was not a servant at Thornhill who did not know that the Duchess had once scrubbed floors and gone hungry and been rubbed with ash to keep her small, for she never let anyone forget it, least of all herself. "I was where you are," she would tell a frightened new scullery maid. "And look, there is no cage here. You are safe in this house. You will always be safe here." "You are watching him run again," the Duke said, coming out onto the terrace to stand beside her. "I am watching Barnaby pretend he cannot catch him," Clara said. "He could have had him 3 times over. He lets him win because it makes him laugh. The sergeant would let that boy get away with murder." The Duke slid an arm around her waist, and she leaned into him without thinking, a thing that had once been impossible for her, the simple animal trust of leaning her weight against another person, and that was now as natural as breathing. "As would you. As, I confess, would I." They stood together in the sun. Old Martha was asleep in her chair at the end of the terrace, a shawl over her knees, a cup of tea gone cold at her elbow. She slept a great deal now. She was past 80 and frail, and she would not be with them a great many more summers. But she had lived to see it, all of it. She had lived to give the locket into Clara's own hands, as she had sworn to a dying mother she would. She had lived to see the child she'd searched 18 years for grown, and safe, and loved, and a mother herself. She had kept her promise. And now she slept in the sun at Thornhill, warm and cared for and dear to everyone in the house, and she asked for nothing more from the world, for the world had, at the very last, given her everything. "Come inside a moment," the Duke said. "There is something I want to show you. It came this morning while you were at the school." He led her into the house, through the great hall and up the curving stair, past the stern painted men in armor and the beautiful women in silk, and Clara no longer felt small beneath them, for she knew now that she belonged among them as surely as any. He brought her to the library, and there, above the great stone hearth where a fire had burned on the coldest morning of her life, hung a new frame. Clara stopped. It was a single frame, but it held two portraits side by side. On the left, a young woman with dark hair and a high clear brow and wide-set gray-green eyes, Margaret Merrick, taken from the tiny painting the old Duke had carried 2 years in his pocket, copied and enlarged now by a fine hand, so that at last she might be seen properly, and remembered, and not shut away in a little case. And on the right, a laughing man in a red coat, Captain Edmund Merrick, taken from Martha's locket, the two halves of a marriage that death had broken now made whole again upon a wall together, where their daughter and her children's children might look up and know their faces. Beneath the frame, a small brass plate had been fixed. Clara stepped closer to read it. Captain Edmund Merrick and Margaret his wife, who loved their daughter before she drew breath, and were not here to raise her, but whose faces watch over her house at last. Clara stood before it for a long time, and did not trust herself to speak. "You said once," the Duke murmured behind her, "that they gave you your life back too late to live it, that you had a mother who loved you and a father who was a hero, and you would never know either of them." His hand found her shoulder, the left one, over the small dark crescent that had helped prove her, all that long time ago. "You were right that it came too late for you to know them, but it did not come too late for Edmund to grow up beneath their faces, or for his children after him. They will know exactly whose blood they carry. They will know it was proud and brave and true. That is not nothing, Clara. It is the one thing your aunt could never manage to steal, though she stole 18 years of everything else, the knowing of where you came from. It is yours now. It is his." He nodded toward the window, toward the sound of the boys' laughter drifting up from the garden. "It is theirs forever." Clara reached up and covered his hand with her own. "No," she said softly, "it is not nothing." She looked up at her mother's gray eyes, so like her own, so like her son's. "It is everything." Far away, in a mean set of rooms in a town where nobody knew their name, the Crail women lived out their small and bitter days. They had not gone to prison in the end. The Duke, at Clara's own quiet asking, had not pressed for the harshest sentence the law allowed. "I do not want their suffering," she had told him. "I have had enough of suffering under that roof to last 100 lives. I only want them gone and small and never able to touch anyone the way they touched me." And so it had been arranged. The fraud was made public, every penny of the stolen pension reclaimed, their standing in the county destroyed past any mending. Prudence never made her fine marriage. No gentleman of any name would have a Crail now, and she grew from a sharp and scheming girl into a sour and disappointed woman, keeping house in cramped rooms for a mother who blamed her, endlessly, for a ruin that had been the mother's own making. They had wanted a fortune, and a fine match, and a great house. They had rubbed ash on a girl's face to keep it all, and they had ended with none of it, with only each other, and the long cold years, and the knowledge, gnawing and inescapable, that the small ash-streaked nobody they had despised was now a duchess whose kindness the whole county praised, whose children laughed in a great green garden, whose parents' faces hung in honor above a nobleman's hearth. That was their punishment, not a cell, just the rest of their lives spent knowing exactly what they had thrown away and exactly how completely the girl they tried to erase had won. It was, Clara thought, on the rare occasions she thought of them at all, a far more fitting justice than any prison. She did not hate them. She had found, somewhat to her surprise, that she could not even manage to be afraid of them anymore. They had shaped the whole of her childhood, and now they could not so much as cast a shadow across a single hour of her days. That, in the end, was the truest freedom of all, not that they were punished, but that they no longer mattered. That evening, when the sun was going down gold over the gardens of Thornhill, Clara walked out alone to the end of the long yew walk. The heron was at the lower pond, as it so often was, still and patient in the shallows, fishing the quiet water. Clara stood and watched it for a while in the warm and failing light. Behind her the great house glowed, its windows full of firelight. Somewhere within it her son was being put to bed, and her husband was reading by the hearth beneath her parents' faces, and an old nurse dozed in her chair, and an old soldier told war stories to anyone who would listen, and every soul in that house was warm and safe and home. She thought about the girl who had first come up this drive 4 years ago, in a torn gray shawl, with cold ash on her cheeks and a ring on a string and nothing else in all the world. The girl who had been told her whole life that she was nobody, nothing, forgettable. She thought about how that girl had stood in the courtyard and prayed to go unseen. And she thought, "How glad I am that you were seen." The heron stirred and spread its great wings and rose from the water up into the gold and darkening sky, climbing, the way the lark climbed on her father's ring. Clara watched it go until it was only a dark shape against the last of the light. Then she turned and walked back up the long yew walk toward the warm and glowing house, toward her name, and her family, and the whole free life she had chosen. And this time no one had to ask her who she was. She knew. She had always, somewhere deep beneath the ash, been exactly who she was. It had only taken the whole world a little while to see it. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.